Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Mr. Silverstein. Today we're going to move into our next concept on photosynthesis. So get out your spiral notebooks or your unit pack, turn to page 24 in your unit pack. I'm going to share my screen and let's get started. All right, so we are in our week 14. This is unit 3 on energy flow. And we're going to move into concept 4 photosynthesis, unit 3, concept 4, part 1. And the big idea that we're working with, of course, in this whole unit on energy flow is that we're recognizing that radiant energy from the sun gets transformed into chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis. And our objective today in this lesson is for you to be able to summarize the process of photosynthesis and list the 2 chemical products of photosynthesis. So if you're using your unit pack, turn over to page 24 in the notes or graphic organizer, or put your notes in your spiral notebook, however you want to do that. And this particular topic is going to work in 4 parts. It's going to take this week and next week. We're going to have some practice, and we'll have some lab activities when you're in class. So I want to first start off with some general photosynthesis vocabulary, and make sure you add this to your vocabulary section or your vocab sheets. The first part that we're going to look at on photosynthesis is going to be the processes. And these include the Calvin cycle, and we're going to get into that part probably in a day or two. The next are the organelles. They include the chloroplast. If you recall from our unit on cells, plant cells have the chloroplast, and the chloroplast looks like these little stacks of pancakes or little stacks like you'd see in a battery. So this organelle is the chloroplast, and we have the grana or the granum, the stroma, which is a fluid, the thylakoids and the thylakoid membranes, and the chlorophyll, which is that green pigment we're going to talk about. Plus, the organelle has an outer membrane and an inner membrane. So add these vocabulary words to your list: photosynthesis, Calvin cycle, chloroplast, grana, stroma, thylakoids, and chlorophyll. Leave this up here for a moment so you can get those in your notes. All right, let's talk about an overview of photosynthesis. Remember, all organisms need a constant supply of energy to survive. When we looked at our lessons on the food web, we saw that different organisms at different levels in the trophic level obtained just about 10% of the energy from the previous organism. But since all organisms need a constant supply of energy to survive, they have to get that food from someplace. And for most life on Earth, the ultimate source of energy comes from the sun. And the conversion of that energy source into something usable is accomplished by the process of photosynthesis. So we're going to take sunlight, we're going to take some carbon dioxide gas, and we're going to take some water and some nutrients from the soil, and we're going to convert that into energy. So the photosynthesis process is the overall process by which sunlight or solar light energy chemically converts water and carbon dioxide gas into chemical energy stored in glucose. And we can represent this by the following chemical equation. And we've seen this equation before. We looked at it when we were working with macromolecules. But let's look at it down here on the lower left of your screen. We're going to take 6 CO2, which is carbon dioxide, plus 6 water molecules. They're going to combine together, form a chemical reaction with solar energy, And the product, what comes out, is going to be 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens, plus 6 more oxygen molecules. So it's carbon dioxide and water plus solar energy is going to yield glucose and oxygen. So let's look at the image that we have here. This is showing the image of a plant growing on the earth. The top left, we've got the light energy. We've got a little plant that's growing here. The plant takes in carbon dioxide gas through its leaves. It takes in water from the soil and from the rain. And as it grows, it produces sugar or glucose, also a carbohydrate. And the plant then releases oxygen back into the atmosphere. So it's a really cool process if you think about it. In fact, it's probably one of the most incredible manufacturing processes that have ever existed. This is another way of looking at the illustration. Here we have a leaf. The leaf takes in 6 carbon dioxide molecules plus 6 water molecules, light energy, and it releases C6H12O6, which is glucose, and it releases oxygen gas. Now that glucose is also helping that plant continue to nourish itself. Remember, plants are autotrophs, meaning they self-nourish. So when you're looking at this process of photosynthesis, the plant takes in its input or its reactants, carbon dioxide plus water. The light energy helps convert that into an output of, or a product of glucose and oxygen gas. And when we get into our concepts on cellular respiration, you're going to see how this reverses and how you and I get our energy. Let's go back and look at the chemistry again in more detail. So we have our reactants. Those are the ingredients. The ingredients for this chemical reaction are carbon dioxide gas, that's 1 carbon and 2 oxygens, and H2O, which is 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, or water. You add the solar energy, and then it converts that through a chemical reaction to the glucose, which is a product, C6H12O6, and the oxygen. Now, the solar energy from the sun is necessary for photosynthesis to happen, as well as a couple of other enzymes, but it isn't considered a reactant or a product. You might want to consider the solar energy like a catalyst or like an enzyme to help it have the reaction, but isn't part of the reactant or the product. So the chemistry again, carbon dioxide plus water plus solar energy yields glucose and oxygen. Make sure you're familiar with these particular formulas because you're going to see them a lot the rest of this semester. Now, we talked about the chloroplast when we spent our time on cells, but let's dig into the structure of the chloroplast right now. Photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplast, which has 2 main parts. The first main part is the grana. These are the pancake-like stacks of thylakoid membrane. And remember, a membrane allows things in and things out. The second part of the chloroplast, where photosynthesis takes place, is in a fluid-like substance that's called the stroma. And it's a fluid-like substance that fills the space between all of these grana, or these pancakes. Now, if any of you have ever seen a battery taken apart, you'll know that in a battery that stores energy, you have little panels, and then there's fluid in there. And that's what helps that conduct its electricity in a battery. But here, this stroma helps fill that space between the grana so that the reactions can happen. And we're going to look at the structure of the chloroplast a little bit in more detail when we get into our next part of this discussion. So you've got the grana. You should draw this in your notes. There may be an illustration on the bottom of page 24 for you to highlight this. You've got the grana, which are these little pancake-like stacks. You've got the thylakoid membrane, which surrounds the grana. Then you have the stroma, which is a fluid-like substance that fills the space. I remember whenever there's fluid inside of one of these organelles, that fluid is also allowing things to transfer in and out and move around inside that organelle. And it gives it some structure. Now, here's a bigger image of how this process of photosynthesis works from an illustration standpoint. And what I'd like you to do is, after I walk you through this, pause the video and sketch this in your notes. And it's going to help you really understand how the parts flow to make photosynthesis happen. So we start off with our tree, and the tree has roots that go down into the ground. And the tree brings water in through the roots. That's the water, that's the H2O. On the left-hand side, we're going to call this the reactants. Now, not only is it taking in water, it's taking in some minerals, and we get our unit on ecology. We'll talk about those minerals. The plant leaves, or the tree leaves, absorb or take in through stomata, which are these little tiny holes in the leaves, carbon dioxide gas. It also takes in light energy into the chlorophyll inside the chloroplast. A chemical reaction occurs, and the plant has sugar or glucose as a product, which also helps feed itself and provide itself energy. And it also releases oxygen back into the atmosphere. Now, if we take this a step further, if this wasn't, say, a tree, well, it could be. Let's call it an apple tree. If you took an apple off the apple tree, you now get a food source for you, which is filled with carbohydrate, and you're also inhaling the air that has oxygen. And so photosynthesis is necessary before we get to cellular respiration. But I want you to pause the video and sketch this in your notes, or you can open up the slides later and sketch this down as well. Hey, have you ever wondered why plants are green? Well, by now you pretty much got the hint that the chloroplast has something to do with it, because we showed it to you in green. But here we have a nice tree, looks like a palm tree, nice green leaves, but why are those leaves green? Well, it comes from the presence of the pigment chlorophyll. And chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B and some other pigments called carotenoids absorb every color of the light spectrum except green. And so when it's absorbing all the other colors of light of the spectrum except green, green is reflected back, and that's what you see. Now, some of you that have lived in other parts of the country notice that during the fall period of time, that's September, October, and early November, when the sunlight is less throughout the day and the plants don't get as much sunlight, that some of those leaves start to turn color. They start to turn yellow and brown, and that's because they're not getting enough sunlight to stimulate the chlorophyll. So if anybody ever asks you, hey, how come plants are green? You know that it's from the presence of the pigment chlorophyll, and that the plant absorbs all the other colors from the spectrum except green, and it reflects that back. So let's review on our part one of this. All organisms need a constant supply of energy to survive. And for most life on Earth, the ultimate source of energy is the sun. We convert that energy source into something that's usable, and that's accomplished by the process of photosynthesis. Remember, photo means light, and synthesis or synthesize means to put together. And so photosynthesis is the overall process by which sunlight or solar and light energy chemically converts water and carbon dioxide gas into chemical energy that's stored in the glucose, which is a sugar carbohydrate. So, update your notes. You can open up the slides in the next tab here, and then open up the next assignment tab and do the review on quizzes on photosynthesis. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. This was part one of photosynthesis. After you're done with this lesson and this assignment, open up the next one and move on to part two. I'm Mr. Silverstein. If you have any questions along the way, make sure you email me. We'll get back to you shortly. You guys have a great day.